Well, to help us put the president's remarks into context tonight, I'm joined by Bowman from the Foundation for Defense of Democracies in Washington, D.C. Bradley is also a U.S. veteran, and Michael Beckley. He's a political scientist at Tufts University, author of Unrivaled: Why America Will Remain the World's Sole Superpower. Gentlemen, to both of you, it's good to have you on the program. Brad, let me start with you. The president's comments, they sounded clear and anything but ambiguous last night. What did you think when you heard what he said?
Thanks for the opportunity to join you, and thanks for the question. You know, I think it's clear that the president misspoke. And the evidence of that is basically that his administration more or less said so since then and has been in mess cleanup mode since last night. It's interesting, President Biden, whom I respect as an individual, brags about his relationship with Xi Jinping. He brags about his experience in foreign policy. And yet in probably the most tense international security issue we had, he was sloppy and less than optimal. And the stakes, as your lead-in suggests here, are high. And this is not an area where we need the president of the United States shooting from the hip. The stakes are just too high. So he suggested that there was no ambiguity, and yet the policy, as your lead suggests, for decades has been one of strategic ambiguity, deliberate ambiguity. And so, it's unfortunate the president made that mistake. But things are definitely coming to the head right now as China takes steps to potentially take Taiwan by force. I hope they don't, but actions and words at this moment matter for sure.
Michael, let me get your take on this. I mean, was this a U.S. president trying to sound strong who actually ended up sounding more of a hawk than he wants to be?
Yeah, I agree with Bradley. I think he misspoke. I mean, this is similar to what happened to George W. Bush when he was asked at a press conference, what would the United States do to defend Taiwan if China attacked? And he said, whatever it takes. And then his aides had to similarly walk back that rhetoric. I mean, presidents get asked a million questions a day, so I wouldn't put too much stock in what Biden said. On the other hand, I do think there is good reason to expect the United States to intervene in some capacity if China does attack Taiwan. It'll dictate that depending on the situation at hand. So I think he's probably spent a lot of time working with his national security staff trying to come up with a viable defense of Taiwan, and is probably thinking in that mindset. But I don't think he meant to change America's declaratory policy in a CNN town hall.
Well, let me ask you, Brad, about this notion of strategic ambiguity. What exactly does that mean? You say it's called ambiguity on purpose. Why?
It's a great question, and it's difficult to give you a satisfactory answer in 30 seconds or less. But the bottom line is, a lot of this goes back to the One China policy and the Taiwan Relations Act. The bottom line is the United States does not want two things. We don't want a Chinese military invasion of Taiwan, and we don't want Taipei to declare independence. And so we're trying to weave between these wickets, if you will, to accomplish both those objectives. And so if we were to say, absolutely, we're going to come to Taiwan's defense no matter what, don't you dare, there's a concern in some circles that could incentivize leaders in Taipei to declare independence, which could invite the very thing we don't want, which is an invasion or attack by Beijing on Taiwan. So, you can criticize this policy, but I think we need to remind ourselves that we're in a particularly tenuous moment, as I implied earlier, for several reasons. One is we've seen the Beijing undertaking the most significant military modernization effort in the history of the People's Republic of China, eroding the military balance of power in the Taiwan Strait. We also see Xi Jinping in kind of a vulnerable moment politically and economically. And so this is not a time for taking risk, I'd say. This is a time for encouraging stability, helping Taiwan defend itself, and making clear to Beijing that they cannot accomplish their political objectives in Taiwan with the use of military force.
Well, Brad, do you think there's a fear, though, at the Pentagon particularly, that if China were to invade Taiwan, that this would be a war that the U.S. would not be able to win?
If you'd asked me that 20 years ago, I would have laughed. It's not a laughable question now. If you look at what our top military command, Indo-Pacific Command, has said in their report to Congress, they say the military balance of power has become, quote, more unfavorable in time and continues to erode. The previous commander of Indo-Pacific Command said he thought there could be an attack by Beijing on Taiwan in the next 6 years. People debate these timelines. There's good, smart people on both sides of this debate. bottom line is we're in a less good position now than we were years ago. And I think this is not a time for American arrogance or overconfidence. This is a time for precaution and trying to help Taiwan make itself a porcupine, an unappealing candidate for consumption by a predator.
Let me throw that to Michael. Michael, you wrote a book that says the U.S. will remain the sole superpower, that China is not a force that we have to fear becoming the second superpower. It doesn't sound like that, though, when you look at the military reality.
Yeah, I think that's true at the global level, but I agree with Bradley that there are local balances of power, and especially in the Taiwan Strait, where geography just nullifies a lot of American military superiority. The United States only has two major military bases within even 500 miles of Taiwan. They're both on Okinawa, Japan, and China now has missiles that could potentially wipe those bases out in a Pearl Harbor style surprise attack. So the problem is that even though the United States and Taiwan have very advanced militaries, they put a lot of their eggs in a very few number of baskets. The United States with aircraft carriers and a few bases, and Taiwan by investing in things like F-16s, advanced fighter jets that may not make it off the runway if China conducts this sort of surprise attack. So I agree with Bradley also that the window of opportunity for China may be closer than we think, because the United States and Taiwan have these very ambitious plans to revamp their defenses, and they could make Taiwan extremely difficult to conquer by, say, the 2030s. So China may be looking ahead and saying, well, our opportunity is right now, while the United States and Taiwan still haven't gotten their act fully together. That's one of the many reasons why I think this current situation is so dangerous.
Well, Michael, what should the U.S.'s end game here be, though, with Taiwan? Are we supposed to indefinitely expect Washington to expect Taiwan to not declare its independence and for Beijing to accept that?
I mean, that's an excellent question. I mean, sometimes in international relations, you need really convoluted, stupid compromises to keep everyone alive for another day. And unfortunately, we're in one of these situations where you have to sort of play this charade to not overly provoke Beijing, not overly embolden the Taiwanese. And that's largely where this policy, which seems to be the least bad option, has come out of. The fact that the United States recognizes that all sides on both sides think Taiwan is part of China, but then does not fully commit to Taiwan's defense, while at the same time having a law that says the United States has to help Taiwan defend itself by selling it arms and other things.
Brad, I've got 1 minute. Let me just put this final question to you. If you were advising President Biden on Taiwan, what would you tell him that he should do?
Thanks for the question. I would tell him that American interests are in fundamental danger in the Taiwan Strait, and reluctance during the Obama administration to sell Taiwan arms was a mistake, that the balance of power is eroded, and we need to expedite a whole number of defense sales to Taiwan, because those defense sales, per a Ronald Reagan memo in the 1980s to a Secretary of Defense and Secretary of State, which has helped guide policy, are based on the threat to Taiwan. That threat has increased. To restore some semblance of a balance, which we're a long way from right now, we need to help Taiwan make itself far more capable, and we need to improve American ability to come quickly to Taiwan's defense, because that's increasingly in doubt.
Bradley Bowman and Michael Beckley, to both of you, thank you. Excellent discussion, helping us to understand how serious the situation really is. Thank you.
Thank you.